Good morning, Excellencies, ladies and gentlemen. I call to order the first virtual meeting of the Operational Activities for Development segment of the Economic and Social Council at its 2021 session on the overarching theme of amplifying the United Nations Development System's impact in support of the Decade of Action. This meeting of the Council is being held using remote simultaneous interpretation. In this regard, I would like to request participants to be mindful of the additional difficulties experienced by interpreters when working remotely and to deliver statements at a normal speaking speed. As we begin the segment, I would note that the United Nations country teams have been responding in emergency mode to the huge social and economic impacts of the COVID-19 pandemic, supporting authorities to save millions of lives and livelihoods. And I invite delegations to view a video showing some key results from a new generation of UN country teams led by the resident coordinator system. Please play the video.
In 2020, the coronavirus pandemic touched every community on Earth. As COVID-19 spread, an unprecedented response was taking shape in 162 countries and territories, with the United Nations team's response led by an independent resident coordinator system. Since the start of the pandemic, UN teams mobilized and redirected over $5 billion in just 8 months to address the socioeconomic impact of the pandemic. 240 million people received essential health services. 36 million people received critical water and sanitation supplies. 1 in 10 children globally received UN-backed distance learning support. 54.2 million COVID-19 tests and 14.4 million sample collection kits shipped across all regions. 1.1 billion units of personal protective equipment were supplied to 170 countries. 73 million children were vaccinated against life-threatening diseases. And 60 million COVID-19 vaccines were delivered in over 124 countries and territories. A survey of governments hosting UN teams found that 88% of governments believe the resident coordinators effectively lead the UN teams, and 92% of governments believe the resident coordinators ensured a coherent response to the COVID-19 pandemic. As no country has been spared by the COVID-19 pandemic, no country has been left behind by the UN's response. Vaccines for all are not only a moral imperative, they are a necessity in an interconnected world where none of us is safe until all of us are safe. UN teams are supporting countries to respond to COVID-19 for a better recovery to achieve the Sustainable Development Goals.
Mr. Secretary General, Madam Deputy Secretary General, Excellencies, ladies and gentlemen, it is a great pleasure to welcome you to the 2021 Operational Activities for Development segment of the Economic and Social Council. I'm very pleased to welcome the Secretary General to our meeting, as well as the Deputy Secretary General. It is encouraging to see that so many participants have joined us from different parts of the world. This is a testament to the importance we all accord to the work of the United Nations in supporting development. The main objective of this year's Operational Activities segment of ECOSOC will be to review the functioning of the reformed UN Development Cooperation structure. Our sessions over the next 3 days will consider the Secretary General's report on the Development Cooperation Office and the new resident coordinator system. It will involve a dialogue with Program country governments, resident coordinators, and UN country team members, as well as with the executive heads of the UN development system. It will also review where we are 2 years after the adoption of the funding compact. The purpose of our discussion is, of course, to determine how well the UN development system is responding to the needs and priorities of the countries it is designed to help in their national development. We look forward to the contributions of the resident coordinators as well as from the regional organizations, which are important elements of the UN development system. Last but not least, we will review how the UN system can improve and enhance its partnership with the international financial institutions, which have coterminous mandates, larger resources, and specialized expertise in several areas of the multidimensional challenges of development. Excellencies, in the past year, the UN development system has been put to the ultimate stress test. The COVID-19 pandemic has had a particularly devastating impact on the developing countries serviced by the UN development system. With health systems stretched and shattered, lives and livelihoods devastated, revenues eviscerated, large debt liabilities, and little fiscal space to recover from the pandemic and keep their economies afloat. It must be said that even as the developing countries struggled, the UN development system responded with alacrity and coherence to the crisis. Assessment of country needs were quickly prepared, enabling the Secretary General to launch his appeal for emergency help to the most seriously affected developing countries. The preparations of national response programs were coordinated with and often by the resident coordinators. This coordination encompassed the IMF and the World Bank and other UN agencies and organizations, including the country offices of the WHO, UNDP, UNICEF, and others. I believe that in this emergency, the system worked as it was meant to work. This emergency experience provides a solid basis for the permanent enhancement of the effectiveness of the UN development cooperation system and its partnership with governments, other international organizations, civil society, and other development actors. I believe valuable lessons have been learned from the searing experience of COVID-19. The development system works when the objectives to be achieved are clear and nationally driven and determined, when all actors are cooperating to realize such clear objectives, when there is timely response and support from head offices, when there is adequate and timely finance available to respond to the identified objectives. As highlighted in the Secretary General's report, the new resident coordinator system is now firmly in place with new independence and stronger leadership. The General Assembly has recognized that progress has been made in making the UN development system more coherent, impactful, and efficient. The resolution on the 2020 Quadrennial Comprehensive Policy Review, QCPR, provided strategic direction to guide the United Nations development system in its important work for the next 4 years. It asked the UN development system to support integrated policies to realize the SDGs and to help countries to leave no one behind. It identified specific policy areas such as poverty eradication, quality education, social protection, climate change, urgent and equitable rollout of vaccines, and universal health coverage. The Secretary General's report outlines the achievements, but also the challenges and remaining weaknesses in the reform of the UN development system. The report shares the Secretary General's vision for responding to the 2020 QCPR with the same determination that characterized the system's response to COVID-19. The Secretary General has outlined the need to support countries in special situations and address vulnerabilities. He has emphasized the importance of partnerships and the need for cooperation with international financial institutions. He has highlighted the areas where greater efforts are needed and where the rules, regulations, practices, and work culture have not kept pace with a shift towards a system that works as one. The reformed UN development system is working. However, the challenges ahead are imposing. A decade of development gains have been wiped out in most developing countries. They must now focus even more on eradicating poverty and hunger, on building social safety nets for the poor and the most vulnerable, on mobilizing the financing required to respond to the pandemic and to build back towards the achievement of the 2030 Agenda and the SDGs. They have to generate public and private investment in sustainable infrastructure, revive old and build new supply chains, expand exports and resist protectionist trends, diversify their economies, and generate additional revenues. Excellencies, ladies and gentlemen, I now invite the Council to begin its consideration of Agenda Item 7, Operational Activities of the United Nations for International Development Cooperation, and its sub-item A, Follow-up to Policy Recommendations of the General Assembly and the Council, and sub-item B, Reports of the Executive Boards of the United Nations Development Programme, the United Nations Population Fund, the United Nations Office for Project Services, the United Nations Children's Fund, the United Nations Entity for Gender Equality and the Empowerment of Women, and the World Food Programme. Sub-item C on South-South cooperation for development will be deferred until a future session. I am now pleased to welcome the Secretary General of the United Nations, as well as the Deputy Secretary General, and His Excellency Sergei Kislitsia, Vice President of the Economic and Social Council and Chair of the Operational Activities for Development segment. I welcome them to this meeting. Before inviting the Secretary General to take the floor, I invite delegations wishing to intervene during this morning's interactive discussion with the Secretary General to inscribe in the speakers list by using the link that has been posted in the chat box. I encourage delegations to keep the interventions as brief as possible. The Secretary General will be with us for as long as possible. He may have to depart because of other engagements before the end of our meeting. Without further delay, therefore, I invite the Secretary General to present his report on repositioning the UN development system in the context of the system-wide implementation of the quadrennial comprehensive policy review of operational activities for development and his vision for the continuing reform of the UN development system and the implementation of the 2020 QCPR in this time of crisis. Mr. Secretary General, sir, you have